Good morning. I'm John Shattuck, the president and rector of Central European University, and I'm very pleased to be here at this conference of the Institute for New Economic Thinking at Central European University. And I have as my guest this morning Axel Leijonhufvud, who is a distinguished economist and has been widely cited over many years as one of the more, shall we say, daring voices in economics at a time when economics has been perhaps less than daring and has gotten itself into significant trouble. So Axel, if you could just say a few words about your background, very distinguished as it is.
Well, I'm a Swede, born and grew up in Sweden. Came to the United States 50 years and 3 weeks ago approximately, in order to do graduate studies for 9 months. And one thing led to another, and I'm still in the United States. Although for the last 15 years, I've spent part of each year at the University of Trento in Italy. I came to UCLA after finishing doctoral studies at Northwestern in 1964 and taught there for 30-some years before this stint at the University of Trento. And I'm still living with my wife in California, and my children have grown up in the United States.
So you have, with all these years in the United States, you haven't been infected by the, shall we say, the rational expectations economics, which we've been talking about here at this conference, much of which has come out of the United States and which has perhaps gotten us into very serious difficulty right now with the financial crisis. You've spoken at the conference, I think very eloquently, about the failure of economists in a traditional sense to see economics as an open system. Rather, they've looked at it as something of a closed system. Maybe you could explain that a little bit more.
Well, let's take it from the angle of what we teach students. I've become quite impressed how we teach models and how effective we are in inculcating a worldview to the students that comes out of the models, rather than teaching them more about the economy and then asking what kind of model representations will be useful to investigate this or that phenomenon. And so we have got that backwards. That is, we form in students a worldview that is adapted to their methods and sometimes quite strange. The process of socializing students in a graduate school is very, very effective. And they will judge statements about the economy in terms of whether they fit their preconceived models or not. And that is something I think we would have to try to turn around in the way we train people.
Well, one of the things that you said that I thought was particularly provocative yesterday at the conference was that the future state of the economy is unknowable. And yet, I think those who are on the outside of economics professions, and many on the inside, would say that's absurd. Why is it that we can't use probability theory to predict, as we do in many other areas of human endeavor, what the future state of the economy is going to be? And in that sense, why can't we head off the crisis that we just went through?
Well, maybe one way of understanding that is to think about how you do experiments in the natural sciences, in physics, let's say. You do it by, you do what you call controlled experiments, which means that you fix a lot of external factors so that you isolate the thing that you are trying to elicit. Now, think of repeating your physical experiments in a setting where you don't control these factors, but you let all sorts of external influences affect the possible outcome. You would be hard put to make predictions. Well, economists are in that setting, and they should recognize it. They shouldn't lament that we are still not able to predict, like in the natural sciences, and that we'll never be a science until we do. I think we will never be a science until we recognize the true situation that economists face, which is that we are not doing controlled experiments, that by putting a few dummy variables on the right-hand side of econometric equations, it does not mean that we have reduced it to a controlled experiment. So our ambitions to make predictions have to be very limited. And actually, forecasters, I think, are forced to be realistic about it. And what they try to do is to make sort of simple projections 6 months out or something like that. And they run that through a model, and then they look at the result, and they said, I don't believe quite the result for such and such a reason that I haven't been able to control for, so I will sort of adjust what I say. Well, I think we will forever be in that situation. And by trying to conform to this incorrect picture of what science is, and trying to adhere to it, we actually get lost.
Well, I think I can grasp all of that, and I think it's a very important corrective approach toward what's been done with respect to the use of probability theory and projections. But let's say I'm President Obama, and it's time to get some real advice about what the future is going to be. What can an economist tell a policymaker who is, after all, struggling to deal with all these variables that you're talking about? What kind of advice can be given? And I know you have a very strong Keynesian background. You've done a great deal of research on Keynes, and the issue of, for example, government spending. What kind of advice can an economist shall we say, with integrity, give to a president who's asking for what to do?
Well, suppose we track back a little bit to 2008. So late 2008, we have the economy basically in free fall. And the overwhelming priority then was just to get a halt to that process. And the policies that were put in place were quite improvised, and they had to be undertaken by people who had almost no time to think. And frankly, the theory that was predominant in the time was no help at all in guiding them what to do. And I think they have to be given credit for acting quickly, decisively, and actually manage to stop the collapse of a house of cards halfway, which is a very difficult thing to do. But not everything went right. And what people usually think of as Keynesian economics was not a perfect guide, I think. one thing that's missing in Keynes is an explicit regard for the state of balance sheets in the economy. So it is true that if the private sector reduces spending, government spending has to replace that private spending unless you're just going to accept falling incomes. It's also true that if private sector balance sheets are in an awful shape, government balance sheet operations can offset that. Now, if you think that by deficit spending you're going to cure the recession, but you pay no attention to the balance sheet situations, you will find that the spending enables you to hold the level of incomes up for a period, but when you quit, it'll just fall back because the deficits of the government just flows into what I call the sinkholes in, for example, in the financial sector's balance sheet. And it can take a very long time for the flow of deficits to make up the stock of holes in the balance sheet. And the chances are that as you go on doing this and the private sector uses this excess income that results from government spending to improve the balance sheet positions a bit, other variables deteriorate so that you don't get out of the situation. And the example everybody is referring to, of course, is Japan, but it's not the only example. So the present crisis has been a bit of a fiasco for the theory that dominated in the economics profession. But people who say, let's get back to Keynesian economics, should think a little bit about what we know nowadays about what was missing in Keynes and in early Keynesian economics.
You've said, I think quite cogently, that there's a kind of a Scylla and Charybdis of economics. On the one hand, you have the dangers that you were just outlining of defaults in the private sector, which is, after all, what triggered this crisis. And then that's the Scylla, and then on the Charybdis side, you've got the dangers of so much government spending that, in fact, the government deficit begins to grow so out of hand. And I think you also said that the walls between the two are becoming increasingly narrow. How can we navigate between those two very dangerous positions in economics today?
I don't think I have a simple answer to that. This was voicing a concern rather than saying, come to me for an answer.
Right. So we don't expect the phone to ring right now with a request for advice from the
I'd be rather relieved if it doesn't.
if it doesn't.
But so what I'm contrasting is Scylla, private sector defaults, fears about counterparty solvency and so on, sending you into deflationary depression. On the other hand, the government, perhaps in order to stop that, engaging in deficit spending to the point where its solvency is in sort of obvious doubt and creating high inflation. Our usual recipes for recession, the old Keynesian recipes for recession, presume that governments, like the governments of the UK or the US, or for that matter, the Scandinavian countries and so on, in the 30s, that they start out from a very solid balance sheet position. And therefore you can recommend deficit spending and so on without fear. Now in the present situation, we have very few governments in that position in the Western world. And Keynesian policies, to be effective, normally have to be conducted by governments of unquestioned solvency, or the result may be Latin American type inflations. So at the present time now we have this conflict between basically the European Union and the United States, which has led to the US and Europe pursuing inconsistent policies that tend to offset each other, where the European governments are more concerned about the long-term solvency of theirs, and therefore of the possibility of inflation, whereas the US is pressing ahead on the basis of the belief that you can go on increasing the US deficit for quite some time. Well, they are not in the same situation, and the reason is that the dollar is still the key currency, and the competition from the euro has actually weakened, as it were, for that role in this crisis. So even countries or financial institutions that are somewhat fearful of the long-term soundness of the dollar will still at this present time be willing to hold dollars in huge volume for the simple reason that their transactions are denominated in dollars and that there is no safe alternative to the dollar. So the United States has more of a margin of operation than...
Because it's having this fueling of capacity coming in
Yes,
from the rest of the world,
That there is sort of a demand for dollars that arises from the economic crisis. You had this sort of almost perverse phenomenon that the demand for dollars strengthened when the U.S. was in deep trouble.
Deep trouble, yeah. Well, I think let me turn our conversation in a last question to what we're doing here at this conference and what the Institute for New Economic Thinking is trying to do. And you're, of course, on the founding board of governors of the Institute. And you've described here a crisis not only in the economy, but in economics and in the profession of economics. What do you think INET as an institution can do to try to address this institutional crisis in the economics profession?
Well, that is a very difficult question, and I'm sitting here at the conference thinking about it all the time, and I'm not sure I have a very good answer. It is very easy to assemble a group of economists of this size where each participant has his own private list of dissatisfactions, of assumptions that economists normally do that they disagree with and that they think is the source of trouble. But letting them all speak and listen to each other is not going to sort of crystallize into a program or an effective program of action to change the situation. So that's my first worry. My second worry has to do with the sociology of economics. Economics is a peculiarly homogeneous enterprise. And the graduate programs in economics are, in a sociological sense, immensely effective in indoctrinating students. And so they come out of these schools quite indoctrinated with whatever is the ethos, or the ideology, not necessarily in a political sense, of that place. And they come out almost vaccinated against critical voices from the outside. I don't know how we, giving people research grants and so on, by itself won't affect this situation.
Well, let me ask you about one final sort of pointed question on this same point, which is on the theory side. Should we be looking for a new paradigm for economic thinking, or is heterodoxy what we really, above all, ought to be striving for? And if it's heterodoxy, how is that going to be effective in providing information to people who have to make decisions about how to run the economy?
Maybe giving encouragement to heterodoxy is the best we can do. I don't know. I do think that we have to try to rethink our approach to economics, rather than taking economics as it is and saying all that's wrong here is one or two assumptions that had better be changed. But saying that the trouble lies at a deeper level means also that you have to have a longer time horizon about what you're trying to do, and that you're not going to say, if we fund this or fund that, 2 years down the road, we'll be able to feed Obama better advice than he's had.
Yeah, I think, well, clearly some humility is called for here, and I think that's the voice that I hear above all in your analysis, that economists need to recognize the limits of their ability to predict, and also recognize that there are going to be many different explanations for a certain economic phenomenon. So that's an enormous contribution. I think that's really what this conference is all about, and I thank you, Axel, for being a strong voice of reason in a field that is dominated by rational expectations, but a great deal of irrationality. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I don't know whether subsidizing humility is promising.
Well, when the opposite is running the world, it may be a good thing. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you.
Great.